Tim Lenderking, it's great to have you joining us. Walk me through the situation that's currently taking place. How close are we to an ecological disaster?
Thanks so much, Hadley. I think you're referring to the fires that are burning on board a tanker that has 1 million barrels of oil on it. We've been through this before last year with a softer tanker. It was a successful international operation to avert a major oil spill. We're talking about a spill that's 4 times the Exxon Valdez in Alaska, several decades ago. This would decimate Yemen's fishing industry, interfere further with freedom of navigation, sensitive coastal ecosystems destroyed. It's a disaster, and it's easily preventable. It should never have happened in the first place. Obviously, it comes in the context of the Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea to make a statement about Gaza. For most of us, that statement falls totally flat. They're not doing anything to help Gaza or Palestinians by attacking random ships in such a reckless and indiscriminate manner. They've sunk a ship, they've killed crew, they've set this ship on fire, and they've obstructed, despite public pronouncements, they've obstructed the effort to salvage and tow the ship and put the fires out. So it's a very, very delicate moment.
So this specifically, give me a time frame. How close are we to this disaster taking place? Days away?
The experts are saying that 10 days from now, you could start seeing damage to the hulls. There are multiple fires burning on board the ship. There's no oil spill yet that we've been able to see, and lots of people are monitoring the ship for that very reason. But it's a race against time. These fires are burning on board a ticking time bomb, and it must be dealt with. And that means parties from this Yemen conflict and parties that are in conflict with each other need to work together and coordinate and make this happen.
Let's take a step back. How did we get here? Because this was a conflict that members of the current administration said many, many times was a direct result of Saudi intervention in Yemen. You've been in that region for a very long time. Walk me through this.
So when I was appointed the envoy for Yemen by the Biden administration very early in the tenure of the administration, it was the first time that the U.S. had appointed an envoy for Yemen. And what we did was partner very closely with Saudi Arabia, the Omanis, others in the neighborhood, and in fact the Yemeni parties themselves, who have a key voice, obviously, in what happens to their country, and with the UN envoy. And with these combined efforts, we're able to establish a truce in what had been an 8-year civil war with 400 projectiles coming across the border from Yemen into Saudi Arabia every year. And
I remember seeing them in the street in Riyadh.
You remember, right? And you could hear and feel debris coming down. And there were Saudi airstrikes into Yemen, also destructive, and this situation has stopped. And I think it's a major accomplishment and shouldn't be lost in the current context. There is a truce in Yemen. It has held since April 2022, and there was a very strong effort to create a roadmap for a peace process, and that was achieved through a lot of work between the Saudis and the Houthis and the Yemen government, working together essentially to reach agreement on a roadmap. That roadmap is there. It's out there, but it's on pause because Gaza happened on October 7th. Very shortly thereafter, you have the Houthis and other groups tied to Iran trying to assert themselves, and the Houthis in particular, I think, violating international norms by attacking commercial ships, civilian ships, at first saying that they were attacking ships that were going in and out of Israel. Not the case. These are indiscriminate, random, reckless attacks on any ship that is moving in the Red Sea in their own bid to establish their supremacy as rulers of the Red Sea. It's not going to happen. The international community is not going to support that. It's not going to allow that. So that's unfortunately the context that sets us to your first question about the tanker, why it's on fire. It's something, as I said, that is so preventable and should be dealt with very quickly and urgently. The means are there, the resources are there. Let's get them out, put those fires out, tow the ship.
And you're using independent contractors in order to put this fire out, correct?
That's right. That's right. We're in touch with them. But this is
and that's because it's too dangerous for U.S. ships to be in that.
Well, I think the way that this is evolving is that you have a very close relationship on the seas with European and EU-led, European Union-led maritime mission Auspides, and they're partnering very closely, doing a great job, I think, of providing security escorts for the salvage team that would go out there. It's a shame that security escorts are needed. Think of all the resources, and that's because there's a Houthi threat. The Houthis could attack the salvage crew. They've said they won't. They've said publicly that they won't interfere. They must adhere to what they themselves have promised for this to be successful.
What is the plan to stop these attacks?
Well, more broadly, I think what the Houthis have said is that there must be a ceasefire in Gaza. We all want a ceasefire in Gaza. Nothing really on the world stage right now, certainly in the Middle East, is more important than a ceasefire in Gaza, an end to the killing, and a hostage release. And that's something that the United States is working very closely, as you know, with key allies to do that. The Houthis aren't doing anything to contribute to an end to the Gaza conflict.
It's just an excuse.
They are, pushing their own agenda. It's become political theater, essentially, but with very grave consequences. Lives are being lost on the Red Sea. As I said, this catastrophe would be hugely damaging to what is a pristine waterway and a vital international waterway.
But how long, in your mind, is this going to take to put an end to these attacks? Because it requires military intervention, and the United States, as usual, is paying the bulk of this.
Well, I think everybody's paying the bulk of it. If you look at the impact on Chinese shipping and the Chinese economy, it's greater than it is on the U.S. economy because so many ships are having to divert and avoid the area.
Right, but it's our weapons, right, that are being used to take these guys out.
Well, we're essentially not taking anybody out. What we've done is focus very specifically on Houthi military capability, right? What capabilities are they using, drones and missiles, to attack Red Sea ships? We're hitting those.
Yeah.
We're hitting those, but, it hasn't stopped the Houthis. They're resupplying. They're circumventing UN Security Council resolutions. They're getting support from Iran. Iran's playing a key role, I think, to fan the flames, and we need the Iranians literally to not do that.
Yeah.
And to support the salvage effort on this particular ship, but also encourage the Houthis to dial it back. There's no need for a big military theater in the Red Sea at this particular point. Let's devote the resources to ending the Gaza conflict. And I'm sure that when that happens, it will give an opportunity for other crises in the Middle East to de-escalate, and we're going to have to seize that moment.
Oh, you're a diplomat. What is our leverage right now with Iran to convince them not to support the Houthis in these attacks?
I know that the Iranians have said that they're not supportive of they don't want another front breaking out in the Red Sea.
They've got enough fronts as it is.
Lebanon border is hot. Gaza's obviously hot. There have been some attacks elsewhere in the region. So it's a very inflammatory situation right now. And the Iranians can help by encouraging the Houthis to dial it back. And we as the United States have used every opportunity in the past few months to explore every avenue for de-escalation. We've put proposals on the table. We've communicated with the various Yemeni parties. The Houthis are holding hostage a crew from a ship that they hijacked in November, a 25-member crew from 5 countries that have nothing to do with the Gaza conflict, nothing to do with Israel.
But are we surprised? It's the Houthis.
I have to say that the Houthis, for anybody who needed them, are showing their true colors, right? They've taken advantage, as we were saying, of a Gaza conflict to push their own agenda, to amplify to project their own power on the Red Sea. We don't think that is good for Yemen's peace process. It has stalled the peace process. It's put that roadmap that the Houthis themselves worked toward. It's put that on the shelf. There's no way that the international community wants to see a warring party like the Houthis.
But they're supplied by Iran, right?
They are supplied by
Iran.
That's correct.
And we don't have any leverage to convince the Iranians to stop doing that at this point?
Well, I'm not sure. I think, there are ways of getting messages to the Iranians, and we do that on a number of different crises that are happening. So there's a moment, I think, where Iran, which welcomed the truce in Yemen in April 2022, and which has conveyed some concern about an ecological disaster in the Red Sea, capitalizing on those, it would be great for the Iranians to support de-escalation in the Red Sea, irrespective of what's going on in Gaza, because we don't know exactly when there's going to be a Gaza ceasefire. Why should Yemen's crisis, which needs international attention, there's a very serious humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and the Houthi behavior is essentially exacerbating that humanitarian crisis. They're also making it more difficult for humanitarian actors in Yemen to do their job. They've rounded up more than 100 staff, Yemenis from UN and international organizations. These are humanitarian workers in Yemen working to help Yemen.
Yeah.
They're not spies. They're not international traders or whatever. They're just Yemenis working for the benefit of their own country. Let those people go. Let them do their jobs.
What about Russia? Because there are reports that the Russians are supporting the Houthis as well. What evidence do we have that that is happening?
Well, we've been very concerned about those reports, and we've dug into that, and that would be very unfortunate and very inflammatory for the Yemen conflict and for the region if Russia were to abandon what has been a principle which we share. There's no military solution to the conflict in Yemen. That's been a core principle for the Russians, the Chinese, and the United States over these past couple of years, and it's been very helpful to work with that common ground. But the Russians, if they're going to start arming the Houthis, that's a game changer. That's very serious. Saudi Arabia is not going to like that. I don't think the Omanis would like that. I don't think anybody wants to see that. That's going to inflame the conflict. What we're really focusing right now on is de-escalation, literally putting the fires out, as we're trying to do with this tanker.
Just a few days ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin was on stage and thanking Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, for his work in the hostage negotiations between the United States and Russia. You spent a lot of time in Riyadh prior to this role. Is it a surprise to you that Saudi Arabia has become such an important conduit in those conversations?
It's not. I think Saudi Arabia is, just plays a key role in the Middle East region, and it's reforming its own approach to development, diversifying, pushing, developing other industries, its own infrastructure, propelling women into the forefront of diplomacy and Saudi society in a way that, when I was there some years ago, was not happening, or happening very slowly. And I think, important actors, including the great powers, also recognize the important role that Saudi Arabia plays. And they're integral to to ending the Yemen crisis.
In your mind, is this a very different role that Saudi is now taking on? Because obviously, as you say, in the past, they haven't been at the forefront necessarily of great power negotiations, but they're there now.
I do think it's a recognition of the important role they play as a member of the Islamic community with the holy sites in Saudi Arabia, and I think their economic power and their political weight. We talk to the Saudis about so many different issues, everything from investment and trade to, bringing the conflict in Sudan to an end, working on relations with other Middle Eastern countries. So they're playing a very vital role right now. And I think, again, as the U.S. envoy for Yemen, they're key, absolutely key to ending the conflict once and for all, for moving in Yemen, moving beyond the truce that I mentioned, de-escalating the Red Sea attacks, and then trying to bring Yemeni parties together to the table in a political resolution of the Yemen conflict, which is ultimately our goal, and we remain fully committed to that.
We see the Secretary of State making multiple trips, obviously, to the region in the last few months, and essentially trying to give us a preview, if you will, of a U.S.-Saudi strategic agreement, whether it be on security or on perhaps Israeli-Saudi relations. In your mind, how big a part of these future agreements will Yemen be?
I think Yemen has been a big factor in the U.S.-Saudi relationship, but also as a regional crisis. And I think the fact that the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and other countries, Oman, the UAE, are working very closely to try and end the Yemen conflict, there's a recognition that this is possible. And the fact that there is a truce, I think, was a great achievement, but it's not enough. It is not bringing the kind of stability and opportunity for the Yemeni people yet until there's more stability and ability to develop their economy. This is something that the United States is all in on. That's what we want to see happen. We've got to get through this extremely difficult period, these attacks on the Red Sea, the Gaza crisis inflaming the entire region and creating tensions in all directions. We've got to get through this and get back to de-escalation. I believe it's possible on the Yemen side.
Do you believe that this is going to happen before the U.S. election?
I think that's difficult to predict, but I know that the administration is determined on the Yemen file to make progress. Right, just keep pushing at the things that have been successful so far, and keep working with partners to de-escalate. That's really the major thrust of the administration.
We are losing freedom of navigation. In your mind, how important is it these next few days in terms of getting this one ship's fire under control to signal that the Americans have a handle on this situation? Because right now it seems as if the United States, the most important and the most impressive and most powerful Navy in the world, has totally lost control.
You need to protect freedom of navigation with partners, and obviously the countries that border these maritime spaces need to work with us. Many of them do. But there's a non-state actor, the Houthis, that are dabbling in the middle of all this, again, trying to assert their power, their political authority, using Gaza as an excuse. And it's very damaging for the region's economy. We talk about, the Suez Canal incomes that the Egyptians rely on. Those have declined by 50%. The Houthi attacks are hurting humanitarian aid into Sudan. They're hurting Ethiopia, Djibouti. We talk to all of these countries. They may not say something publicly, but they're all privately acknowledging to us that they are against these Houthi attacks. They do not support them. They do not think that Gaza provides an excuse to do this. So we've got to bring those conversations, I think, more into the open, put more pressure on the Houthis. This is not the way for the Houthis to gain international legitimacy. This is not going to build support for them as a credible actor in Yemen. It does the opposite.
Yeah. But in terms of forcing that agenda, how do you do that at this point, other than by means military?
I think you have to look at the different ways that we can put pressure on the Houthis and try and achieve results. Again, Gaza seems to be very important to all this, but again, I think we have to look at ways that we can compartmentalize, if you will, Yemen and see what we can do in the Yemen context. And there it's working very closely with our partners, with regional allies. And indeed, we have, pretty vigorous conversations with the Chinese about ways that we can cooperate to work together to de-escalate the situation in Yemen. Yemen's economy needs a lot of attention. Regional voices, I think, could do a lot more to speak up because they're being negatively affected by this.
For example?
I think you can pick any country. You can pick any country in the region.
We're talking about Jordan, Egypt?
Any. Yeah, all of them. They're all negatively affected by this. And they also want de-escalation across the board, right? No one wants
What's holding them back in your mind? Is it because of the connection with Gaza, or?
I think so. I think Gaza is weighing very heavily on all of our minds, but it also makes it more difficult, I think, for regional countries and allies to speak out as they need to do.
Would it be fair to say that until there's a resolution on Gaza, there won't be a resolution in the Red Sea?
I'm not going to say that because I believe, and I think it's the job that was entrusted to my team and me is that we have to keep working looking at every opportunity to find ways out of this, to defuse. And there are very specific things that the Houthis could do. I mentioned the hijacking of the ship, release the crew. There's no reason that those 25 crewmen can barely have a phone call with their own families. Why are they still being held in Yemen? Let them go. Let the local staff that they've detained inside Yemen show that they are, willing to adhere to some principles other than their own sort of personal gain. I think we're looking for those indications from the Houthis, and their backers could push them in that direction as well.
So, to the idea that we have lost the battle of the Red Sea, how do you respond to that? Because it seems as if we're just in a stasis.
I don't think we've lost the battle for the Red Sea. I think there are opportunities. We're looking at various options to reinstate freedom of navigation. We view this as a temporary situation. Again, as I say, there's no way that the international community is going to allow any non-state actor to continue to attack ships from any part of the Red Sea.
Yeah. But they have been for months. So that's
true.
Where we are.
Their capability to do so has been degraded, but their determination, because as I say, as some of their arsenal is destroyed, they're able to resupply. So we need support to cut off the resupply. Yeah. That's a big part of it, and that's coming essentially from Iran. So that's an area where we're really calling on the Iranians, stop resupplying, stop the smuggling in contravention of UN Security Council resolutions, help us work to de-escalate. It's good for the region.
Yeah. When you take a step back and look at the situation more broadly, China, obviously there are conversations around Taiwan, around freedom of navigation, what any conflict in the South China Sea might look like. They're seeing the Houthis get away with this, at least for now, at a relatively low cost to them and a big cost to us. How worrying is that to you?
Yeah, I think that that conversation that we're having with the Chinese is very important. We will continue to do so.
But they're watching us, and they're seeing us fail.
Well, I don't think we're not where we want to be. That's that's clear. But the Chinese economy is being hurt by this situation. They will acknowledge that to us. The Russian economy, et cetera. So it's a non-tenable situation, and there are multiple ways to dial up the pressure. The question is, who's going to do that, and who's going to do that with us or on their own? We need to look at ways, and you can't.
And will we do that before a U.S. election?
You can't divorce this from a regional context, which is very, very hot and very provocative.
Yeah.
So while I say we're making every effort to compartmentalize and focus on Yemen, I do acknowledge that the Gaza situation is creating problems, more problems for everybody in the region. That needs to be settled.
In your mind, is this something perhaps not done by the U.S. election, but perhaps done by the end of the year? And I ask timelines simply because we keep being told by the Secretary of State that a big agreement is coming with Saudi Arabia. And I'm just putting two and two together.
Everybody's working on that agreement, and everybody's working on the Red Sea as well. I'm hopeful that we'll see good progress in the coming months.
Tim, walk me through how receptive the Yemeni government has been to this work, because essentially you're dealing with for what is for them a terrorist group.
That's right. They do regard the Houthis as a terrorist group. And in fact, we have placed the Houthis this year on one of the terrorist lists that we have at our disposal.
About time.
Some say long overdue. But the Yemen government is the legitimate government that's recognized by the international community, by the United Nations. And there is an 8-person presidential leadership council that leads that government. They need support. They need international support. The Houthis have essentially strangled the Yemen economy. So it's almost impossible for Yemen to produce oil, which it has, produce natural gas, which it has at this particular time. So they're very dependent on outside support at this moment. That's not because they don't have resources. It's because the Houthis have strangled the economy, and that's unfortunate. So we meet with the Yemen government leadership. We, the Europeans, the international community, they will be at the UN General Assembly. We'll have meetings with them there. We'll be talking about what we can do as an international community to strengthen them. For that day, we all want to see when there is a political dialogue, Yemenis talking together about the future of their country.
How important in your mind is it that these conversations are wrapped up in a positive way by January? Because there could be a new administration and they may not necessarily take the same line.
Yeah, I'm pushing certainly as hard as I can from our side, and I have the backing of the administration.
I mean, is that something you use as leverage in these conversations?
The region, moves at its own rhythm, right? So we can't entirely control that. But I would really like to see not only this tanker, of course, dealt with as quickly as possible, like next week, but then move from there into greater de-escalation in the Red Sea and building up the Yemeni party so that they can actually start a political negotiation on the future of the country.
Tim, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Hadley.